Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic podcast. Just remember, before we get into this, remember to like, share, and subscribe. That's really important. Like the video, leave a comment, share the video, and subscribe. The reason why I say this is because it seems like my channel is like heavily shadow banned. I see like some of these channels that are getting like 50,000, 70,000 views on UFO videos. And I'm like, why, like I know my content's just as good as that. So, like I don't understand. I just don't understand it, But anyway, other than that, just support the podcast. There'll be links in the description on how to do that. It's very important. If and that's only optional. It's not you're not obligated to do that, obviously. But today is one of my favorite guests on the show. He's one of the most requested guests. He always brings such an interesting show. He always has the most interesting topics to talk about, and that is Robert Bitto of Mexico Unexplained. I think he has one of the most creative channels on YouTube as far as like original content and like cool ideas about the paranormal and supernatural culture of Mexico and getting into like the mysteries, traditions, and folklore. I wrote a blurb about it. I wrote Robert Bitto is the creator and host of Mexico Unexplained, a long-running podcast on YouTube channel dedicated to the deep mysteries of Mexico, ancient civilizations, high-strangeness folklore, cryptids, haunted places, UFO encounters, lost history, miracles, and unexplained anomalies. Robert is a researcher, author, and cultural explorer who dives deep into the overlooked and bizarre and truly uncanny corners of Mexico's past and present. His channel's philosophy, information, not confirmation. He presents the research and lets the audience decide, kind of like how we do here. Tonight, we'll go way deeper into the mysteries of Mexico with Robert. We'll explore ancient enigmas, UFO waves, cryptids, paranormal hotspots, indigenous lore, and the hidden history of Mexico that they don't teach you in school. Expect high strangeness, ancient tech, gods as ETs, shapeshifters, miracle sites, portals, and some of the strangest cases in Southern America or Mesoamericans. If you love Mesoamerican civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, lost history, this is definitely the show for you. And with all that said, I'd like to give him a big warm welcome back to the show. Robert, thank you so much for coming back on, man. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back. And that was a mouthful you had there. I think we'd need like about 6 hours of a live stream to cover everything that you mentioned. But yeah, thanks for having me back on again. And I understand what you say at the beginning of your show about the algorithm and stuff for YouTube. Next week, I know your shows are evergreen, but we're recording on February 10th. February 18th is when I posted my first video on YouTube 10 years ago, 2016. Wow. So I've been doing this for a long time now. I have 445 long format shows and then about 1,300 shorts. So
wow. Yeah, you've been doing it longer than me, Robert. I started in 2019. That's when I started my whole podcasting career, and then I had my channel taken away in 2025, so I had to start the new channel. But I was doing good before they took my channel down. I had I think I was at like 20 or 22,000 subscribers. And what's weird to me is not just the algorithm, but now it's like I have close to 7,000 subscribers now. And sure, people remember me from my old channel too. But what I don't understand is where's all those other people? Why are they not able to find me? You know what I mean? It's probably the same reason as why are my videos not getting the amount of views that like some channels like Vetted gets and all these other channels, It's pure it's almost like YouTube picks the people they want to be popular and then they just push those people. You know what I mean? It's kind of like almost sinister in a way. You know what I mean? Because I know you've dealt with this on your channel too. That's kind of why I just kind of wanted to bring it up. Because you're someone that I consider has a very original, really cool content that I think the algorithm should be pushing, you know what I mean? But here we are, and it's 2026 and yeah.
Well, that's interesting. That can segue into a very relevant topic if we want to just dive into some of the things that we can talk about today.
Sure, yeah.
Because you're talking about the algorithm and stuff for YouTube. I had a show that was banned or it was demonetized for years. And I dropped it on October 16th, 2016. And why I say that is because it was a show about a boy saint in Mexico. Today, February 10th, is his feast day. So the day that we are recording this is the feast day of San Jose Sanchez del Rio, and he's considered the boy saint of Mexico. On my show, I deal with the magic, the miracles, and the mysteries of Mexico, I say. So this is like goes into the miraculous part, but it ties into what you were saying about the algorithm in YouTube. YouTube had demonetized that show because they accused me of exploiting children, which was kind of bizarre to me, because all I was doing was talking about this boy saint whose day is today. And to give a little story about this boy saint, he was 12 years old when he joined a rebel movement in Mexico called the Cristeros. And what had happened is in the 20s, there was a new president. After years of the Mexican Revolution, there was a new president, and he decided to crack down on the churches and started to confiscate church land and imprison priests and exile priests and stuff like that. And then so there was an uprising in the countryside, mostly of the states of Michoacan and Jalisco, of people who were rebelling against the government for taking their church away from them, basically. And so this kid was 12 when he joined the rebel movement called the Cristeros, and he was actually arrested after he was firing a rifle at government officials. It's kind of like kind of similar to what's going on in the parts of the United States right now. There's uprising against authority, right? And so then they captured this kid, and then they executed some other person by hanging in front of him, and they said to him, this is what's going to happen to you unless you give up this whole Cristero movement, and unless you say that, God is not real, and, you turn against the church and all this stuff. And then the kid said, no, I'm not going to do that. By that time, he was 13 or 14. It was a couple years in. And then he said his last words were Vivo Cristo Rey, and Viva Cristo Rey, and which that means long live Christ the King. And we hear Christ is King a lot nowadays too, out there on YouTube and, the social media world. But this kid said that, and then they shot him and threw him in a ditch. And then, and then so a priest recovered the body and everything. And then people in Mexico started praying to this kid, this dead child, and miracles were happening, like medical miracles. People were being cured and everything. Then the Vatican got involved, and the way that the whole sainthood process goes, they declare somebody a servant of God, then they declare them venerable, then blessed, and that's beatification, when one miracle is confirmed, and then they make the person a saint. And so on October 16th of 2016, they made this little boy a saint. The Vatican did, Pope Francis. But today is his feast day, February 10th, because this was the day that he got shot and thrown in the ditch. And, then like I said, all these miracles were happening and stuff. So, some paranormal activity and, high strangeness in Mexico takes on a religious flavor, because nobody can explain like these healings when people were asking for the intercession of this little boy. So, yeah. But that kind of ties. It's funny that it's interesting that today is his feast day, and we're talking about YouTube and shadow banning and everything. They threatened to take that video down, but they demonetized me for like 7 years. And then I did a couple of appeals, and I said, look, this is history. It's not exploitation of children, and I don't have like gruesome photos or anything. It was just plain talking history. So you never know what's going to happen with the venues and stuff, but there
Yeah.
were, so anyway,
Did,
I just thought
did
that
you
was
post a
interesting.
photo? Is that what got you kind of like? Was it a photo of it that kind of got you banned from it, or what? Like, what was it like? Was it just
No,
something
they
like?
didn't even there. Yeah, there weren't any. I mean, there were pictures of him, and if you go on my website, in fact, I reposted it today because today is his saint, his feast day. I didn't, there are pictures of him just as a little boy before the war started. There's nothing gruesome, nothing about violence. I was very, what I just said. He was shot and thrown into a ditch. I didn't even say it quite that way. I was more delicate in the way I phrased that,
Yeah.
but that wasn't good enough. You never know what's going to happen, but
Yeah. Well, just for YouTube purposes, what we're just exploring this from a historical context. No need to. We're not.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, who knows what the. I mean, but but what have you been covering recently, Robert? Like what I mean, because I have a bunch of questions to ask you, but I can't remember what exactly we covered. So like I was gonna kind of ask you like what interesting stuff that you've kind of been covering that you think the audience would kind of have you come across any new UFO information or anything like that?
Well, you know what? First, if I may, I've come out with another book since the last time that we've talked.
Oh,
So that's
nice.
something new that I've done. And we can talk more about this at the end of the show when you ask people, when you tell people where to find me and stuff. But yeah, you were asking me about my new research or whatever. I've said this a couple times before, but Mexico is like a whole other world, and it's fertile ground for any researcher. I wish there were more researchers than just me, doing this stuff, because there's very little information that gets out of Mexico or that gets out of certain regions of Mexico. And so, like a recent topic that I covered that's really interesting to people really like giants. Okay. That's like a big topic, right? And so I found this story about a cave that supposedly had all of these giant skeletons, 8 to 9 feet tall, that an American uncovered. And the giants were blonde. So
Wow.
they were blonde, and it was in a remote area of the northern deserts of Mexico near Copper Canyon. I don't know if you've ever heard of Copper Canyon before.
No, what's that?
It's bigger than the Grand Canyon. People think
Wow.
that the Grand Canyon's the biggest canyon in the world or whatever, but Copper Canyon is bigger than the Grand Canyon, and it's in a really remote part of northern Mexico. There are a lot of indigenous people who live around there because, the mainstream Mexicans, they don't really want to settle there, So the
Yeah.
indigenous just live there in their traditional lives. And there was a guy that went down there, an American called Paxton Hayes, actually from Omaha, Nebraska, the state I'm in right now, state I live in now, but like 2.5, 3 hours away from me. But he was from Omaha, Nebraska, and he was a herpetologist. He collected snakes. But when he went down there, he heard these legends about a race of tall blonde people, giants, that the natives, the Yaquis, and also the Tarahumara Indians were telling him these stories. So he stumbled upon these caves near Copper Canyon, and in these caves there were mummies. There were also mummies of dwarfs too, in addition
No
to these.
way.
Yeah, so
Holy shit.
yeah, there were dwarf mummies and there were giants that were 8 or 9 feet tall. And
Holy shit.
and they had blonde hair, and that went along with the legends that these indigenous people, even the Seri people on the coast. I did a show called the Giants of Tiburon Island, Shark Island, in the Gulf of California or the Sea of Cortez. Even out off to the coast, there are legends of these, blonde or red haired giants. But this man went into those caves and then brought out some of the skeletons and the artifacts, and some of the artifacts were tested and they dated back 90,000 years. So that pushes a lot of the archaeology back farther than we thought. But
Yeah, I mean, this a lot of this like kind of ties into like other lore of giants, like Sumerian lore, or like Babylonian when they found giants over in that area. I believe they were blonde haired, or or like they said even like the pharaohs in Egypt had like red hair, believe it or
right,
not. It makes me think of a about how Robert Sepper, if you ever watch him, how he talks about how the Aryan people came
right,
and they spread culture all throughout that area. But like here's what I think, and this I think it was something like the Anunnaki, and I think they came all over the world. I think they were all over the world, and going back to kind of what Renetta would talk about and other people, I believe that this continent was once Pangea. Like, because if you kind of like, if you look at the map and you kind of like put if you can kind of piece the continents together like
right,
a jigsaw puzzle. You know what I
right.
mean? So
Yeah.
it almost makes sense that the world was one place before. So I totally believe that the Americas were absolutely civilized before Columbus got here. Like, I don't even think that's a question. I think there are already African Americans here too. You know what I mean? I just think the ones that that's a whole controversy. But like, I think there was all kinds of people here. You know what I mean? Like, but I know that's kind of going off track. But where I'm going with this is, I think these giants were like a race of beings that kind of helped spread civilization all over the world. That's kind of like a theory, but I mean, I don't have anything to back that up. It's kind of just kind of like rhetoric, but yeah.
Well, we can speculate on a lot of things, and
Yeah.
like I've always said, it's important to keep our minds open. And if we don't find any answers, that's okay too. You can take whatever you're investigating and put it on a shelf and just leave it there for a little while. Because, I don't obsess about anything that I research. If I hit some dead ends or some brick walls you know, of research, then I just say, okay, I'm going to stop here, because you can go down the proverbial rabbit hole that is bottomless. Look at JFK researchers, you know,
I
or
know, right?
or Bigfoot. I mean, there's you can keep going and
Or even
go and going.
UFOs. UFOs is an endless rabbit hole. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. I mean, you can
Yeah.
keep going and going and going, but you got to have a life and you got to have other things you're interested in. So a lot of times I just put things on the shelf for later, and I just say, okay, it's all right not to have answers. But back to the giant story, once again, this story involves the Smithsonian, because this guy, Paxton Hayes, he brought some of those artifacts back to the United States. Back then in the 30s, it didn't matter. You could take anything out of Mexico, right? And so he took some of the artifacts and the giant bones, some of the mummified remains, and took them to the Smithsonian. And then we know how the story ends, right? What happened to those artifacts?
The Smithsonian covered them up, right?
They
They're
disappeared.
yeah.
When you go in, and people have researched this, they followed up on this. And when you go and you look at the Smithsonian archives, remember this guy was a snake collector. He was a herpetologist. They have a record of him donating snakes to the Smithsonian, not all the other stuff. So,
Wow.
yeah, so that where did it all go? If it was there, I mean, then people say, well, it wasn't really there. And in the 60s, like 30 years later, that entire area of Copper Canyon was thoroughly mapped. And some people say, well, this was all a hoax, because the area has been mapped. But then other people, including indigenous Native Americans who live in that area, say that it's so secluded. There's so many valleys and caves and everything that you cannot know the entire country completely. So someone may stumble onto these mysterious caves, or it could be one big hoax, that was used to sell newspapers in the Great Depression to lift the spirits of Americans. Who knows? But it's a very interesting story. People, it seems like that's a big interest for a lot of people, the whole topic of giants.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd bring that up. That was one of my recent shows.
That's fascinating. And let's get into your new book a little bit. I think that'd be awesome. So tell us a little bit about the new book and where you're going with it.
Well, it's what I've done is with all of my books, they're basically compilations of my shows that are, the scripts of my shows that are grouped by theme. Like the first book that I wrote was called Mexico Unexplained, and that was a little bit of everything. And that came out in 2017. And then because of popular demand, I came out with the second book called Mexican Monsters. And that includes the cryptids and legendary creatures of Mexico. And that hands down is my most popular book of the 4 I've released so far. It blows the sales, and the interest on that book blows the other ones out of the water, but combined. And then the third book that I wrote was called Mexican Miracles. And that included, the story that I told at the beginning of this show about the boy saint and about other, things like there was a bilocating nun, who was in her cloistered convent, but yet she appeared, in another place preaching to Native Americans. So there's, levitating priests, and all this stuff like that, statues that explode, and a lot of what's considered religious, miraculous type stuff. That was book 3. Book 4 is just this weird history, so it's little stories about Mexico that people don't know about. And so and all of this stuff, I'll be honest with you, I'll tell a secret. It's not really a secret, but like I said, these books are compilations of the scripts that I have on my website, the scripts from my YouTube shows. So anybody can go to my website, mexicounexplained.com, and read these scripts, read these articles, and, for free. There's no paywall or anything. And what I do with those entries, with the scripts that are on the website, is I have a reference section on the bottom. So if you want to continue to go down the rabbit hole, and I encourage people to do that, follow up on the references, and maybe hopefully someone else can be adding to some of this research, because with the exception of a few people in Mexico, there's Johanna Diaz Vargas down in Mexico, all in Spanish. There are a few people down in Mexico who cover the paranormal, UFOs, things like that. But other than that, I'm like the only one doing this. And I've been doing this for 10 years now. So I encourage other people to take this up also, because there's a lot of stuff out there. And so what else can we talk about? There's plenty of things.
You want to get into some cryptids? I know the audience really likes talking about cryptids, I know we kind of went over some, but it's okay if we go over some again. But I mean, maybe there are some that we kind of haven't talked about. What kind of fascinates me is that Mexico is like loaded with cryptid folklore. It seemed like to be like a very superstitious culture that that really like almost like takes pride in like the paranormal or something like that, and you see this in like the representation of how many different cryptids they have and stuff, I mean, this also could be just, what is that going on in that area too, but I mean, also I feel like the people somewhat embrace it too,
Well, they're open to it, and it's more, like what I was saying about the boy saint. So in traditional American culture, you wouldn't have somebody praying to a dead boy who was, You know, we wouldn't do that in mainstream American culture. But, down there, oh, my grandma's sick. Maybe if I pray to this little boy who died for the cause of the Cristeros, maybe his soul, maybe he can intercede from the other side and cure my grandma or whatever. There's a different way of thinking. In the United States, we wouldn't really tend to think that way. And then so because there's a different way of thinking and several different ways of thinking. Mexico's not monolithic because there are indigenous groups there, and then blends of, more mestizo that have carryovers from the ancient civilizations. So there's more of an openness, I think, because if your world is filled with magic and interesting things like that, you're going to be more receptive to paranormal stuff or weird things that you may encounter or see in the sky or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, it's really fascinating. Like when did you first start picking up that like when did you first start picking up that the culture was so rich and like paranormal? Like you've been following this for a while, right? You collect a lot of the old magazines because they've been kind of rich in this culture for a long time, it seems. But
Well, for people who don't know how I started down this path, this is a side gig for me, a 10-year side gig. And how this happened is I started a business importing arts and crafts from Mexico in 1999. I've been doing this year will be 27 years. This is my living. That's what I do for a job. Is I go down and I buy arts and crafts from Mexico and other countries, other Latin American countries, and I bring them up here to sell. And I had a store for 10 years, closed down the store in 2009 and sell things online. But I was going to these small towns and out of the way places and stuff. When I had a store, I had a Yelp review say that I was the Indiana Jones of Mexican arts and crafts because I would go to these remote areas and stuff and buy the merchandise. But in these remote areas, I would hear stories about legends, saints, UFOs, whatever. And I was the eye-opening moment was when I bought my favorite paranormal magazine, Muy Interesante, and I was flying back to the States and I was settling in my chair on the airplane. And I was going through the magazine and I was like, some of this stuff, like there were things about crop circles and Mexican scientists were making their commentary. And I was like, I didn't know there were crop circles in Mexico. And look at this commentary. And then I was realizing a lot of the stories that I've heard on buying trips are not leaving Mexico. So that's how all this got started with me, because I was exposed to all this material and I realized that no one was talking about it, at least in English. And then if you were to find it in Spanish, it would be here and there and it wasn't organized online or anything. So, that's how that started.
wow, that's cool. Yeah. And what did you what would you like to research the most, would you say? Like what's your favorite subject to get into?
Well, that's a hard question because if something will pop up and then I'll just go with it, I'll pull a thread or whatever analogy you want to use. And pretty much everything interests me. I like the creatures and stuff. And then some of the UFO stories are interesting. I mean, I find it all very fascinating. And like I said, I've been doing this for 10 years, but there's probably more. And I gave you all the numbers of my shows and stuff. There's more stuff out there that I have yet to cover than what I've covered in the past 10 years. That's how big this is. And like I said, if someone wants to join me, if someone wants to do their own little version of what I'm doing, go for it, because there's a lot of room. Heck, I'll even collaborate with you, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah, because there's always something. And I have my viewers and my followers, they contact me and tell me stories about like their childhood that they spent with their grandma down in Oaxaca or whatever. And, you know, there was a legend of a two-headed creature who lived in the cave outside the town or whatever. And I get contacted like that all the time with people, you know, from people who watch my show. So there's never ending material to talk about
Yeah.
and
I was gonna say,
investigate.
what do you think one of the most misunderstood ancient civilizations in Mexico is, if you had to say?
One of the most misunderstood ancient civilizations in Mexico. Well, I don't know if this could go the wrong way. I don't know. Well, I would say the Olmec, they're the mother civilization. People call them the mother civilization of Mexico, and they're known for the big colossal stone heads. And some people say that those heads look African, and so therefore the civilization was black and like from Africa. But there's no evidence to back that up, really.
Yeah.
But that is gaining a lot of traction right now. So that's, you know, among a lot of these fringe archaeology circles or whatever, the whole Africans started Mexican civilization. That's huge now. It's growing. I thought it was a fad when it first came out, but it seems like it's gaining traction. And I think people are just misunderstanding the Olmec and they don't really know. I mean, a lot of these people who they're saying, look at those heads, they have big lips, they have big noses, but they also have big eyes. You know, they're out of proportion. The features are out of proportion. And some people will say that those look like black features or whatever, but if you go down there, where I've been to the Olmec heartland, I've been down to that part of Mexico, and the people who live there now, who are Native American, who are indigenous, they have those same facial features as those statues. So, and they are not African. So, yeah, that's probably one of the most misunderstood cultures. And they did not have a writing system. So it's a silent culture. They did have some symbols here and there, like the beginnings of pictographic writing, but they're a silent culture. Whereas, like the Maya or the Aztecs or the Zapotecs, they all had scripts. And I did a show last week on the gigantic city of Teotihuacan. They believe now that they had a writing system too. But the Olmecs, they were silent. We can't read their scripts. The Maya, they had tens of thousands of, there's like all of these inscriptions that we can read most of them now. So we can understand the Maya pretty well. And the Aztecs, we can understand them even better because they were the ones that, they were the high civilization that the Spanish encountered in 1519. So there was a lot of, you know, firsthand accounts of what life as an Aztec in the Aztec Empire was like, because the Spanish encountered a living, breathing civilization. And they also had writing too. So we have texts from them that we can read. But those civilizations that don't have the texts, like the Olmec, they just left behind ruins and artifacts. And some of the artifacts, they don't just look like black African. A lot of people say that they look Polynesian or Japanese. And like there was a whole United Nations of multicultural, you know, people living in these Olmec cities. But those features that you can see in those statues can all be found in the people who live there now. And You can get into haplogroups and all of that stuff. The people test as Native Americans and they don't have DNA from anywhere else. And the language is endemic to the Americas. There are not any words that come from Yoruban or some West African language or anything like that. So I don't know.
That's interesting. And then you mentioned Teotihuacan. Do you think that kind of functioned as some kind of ancient energy grid or like an astronomical instrument?
Some people say that. I mean, you can go really fringe. I don't like to use that word, but let's say far away from the mainstream. There are platforms along the Avenue of the Dead, and some people, if you believe in the whole ancient astronauts, ancient aliens thing, these platforms, some people say, were landing pads for UFOs and charging stations, that the pyramids drew energy out of the ether and charged these platforms for the UFOs to land. But that takes a lot of, faith, I think, to believe something like that, but
Yeah.
This is the typical skeptic podcast, right? So we need to take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And then would you say, are there ruins in Mexico that mainstream archaeology kind of avoids or misinterprets, would you say?
No, I mean, that's an interesting question because, you have the mainstream archaeology and you have an institution like the Smithsonian that's down in Mexico called the National Institute of Anthropology and History. INA is the Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia in Spanish. So INAH. And their symbol, it's interesting. Their symbol for this National Institute of Anthropology and History, their symbol, if you look it up, is like an all-seeing eye, like the eye on the pyramid. It's really strange. But this group, it's like the Smithsonian, and they will show up at a ruin and they'll shut it down if there's some weird artifacts being found. Like there was in southern Guanajuato, I've been to the museum that has the artifacts of dinosaurs. There are artifacts, there are clay figurines of dinosaurs, of people with dinosaurs and stuff. And the National Institute of Anthropology and History shut down some of the digs that were in this town of Acámbaro. And they said, no more, we're not giving permits to dig anymore in these ruins. And some people said that was suspicious, but they usually show up when weird stuff happens. And, you should pull up INAH, or anybody listening, INAH, INAH, and look at their logo. It's really bizarre. It's like the eye on top of the pyramid. So it looks really, kind of occult. It's like they're watching you or something. But weird, yeah. So yeah, they are everywhere, and they have at least one office in each state in Mexico. So, yeah, they're on top of things if something, at these excavations, if somebody finds something weird.
Well,
like one time there was a head that was found underneath a pyramid that they suspected was from Rome. From ancient Rome. Actually, one of my viewers who was an archaeologist, a European archaeologist, said that head that they uncovered, specifically, he believed was made in Dacia, in the province of Dacia, which is now Romania. So this guy who, and that's why I love the audience interaction, because there will always be somebody who knows more than I do about something, and then they'll add to whatever I'm investigating. So, I heard about this Roman artifact found under a pyramid or whatever. I put it out there, and then this archaeologist came at me and said, you know what? I think that's real, and I think it's Dacian because of the hat that the head had on it. So yeah. But whenever something, see, that kind of slipped through the cracks. If there's something nowadays, if they were to find an artifact like that, you wouldn't hear about it. This happened, I believe, in the 30s or 40s, where they found this head.
Wow.
That they tied to Rome, ancient Rome. So,
Wow.
how did it get there?
Yeah, really, right? I mean, like, well, that's what I think. I mean, like, I think, like maybe there was a time where these places were once connected, or like the world was connected or something, or maybe people got around more than we think. I don't know. It's almost like how, like, when you look at like the Grand Canyon, they say there's like Egyptian stuff in the Grand Canyon, like how did that get there? It's like it would almost be impossible. I don't know. Like, but we have a really interesting question or comment from Sovereign Cosmic Wildman. I guess he must have talked to you. He says, Bitto and I have both been to an offbeat pyramid in Michoacan, Mexico called Tingabato. He says, ask him about it.
Yeah, Tingabato, that is an interesting site. It has different influences from different cultures. So you want to talk about, I mentioned the United Nations, the Olmecs with all the people from around the world, but this is more of a United Nations for Mexico because there were Maya influences and there were, there were influences from Teotihuacan, influences from Western Mexico in the different pottery styles, architectural styles. And I was allowed to go inside one of the pyramids when I went there in 1989. Now I'm dating myself. When I was a college student, I lived in Michoacan at the time. And now I don't know what that site is like because when I went there in 89, there was just some Mexican guy there that was like a caretaker. And I'm not even sure if that was on private land back then. But they were just excavating and stuff, and we just showed up, and the guy was like, yeah, come on in. And I got to go inside a pyramid there. That's the second time was able to do that, by the way. I was able to go inside the pyramid of Chichen Itza in the Yucatan, the famous pyramid that I have on the Mexico Unexplained logo and everything. If you see that pyramid, it's very recognizable. And in the staircase, and they've shut this down. I was there in 1992, and they were letting people go inside the staircase, and there's another pyramid that's underneath that. And you can climb up inside the pyramid. You can climb up another set of stairs, and on the top of the stairs, there's a jade jaguar that was found there, and I was able to go up in there. And
wow.
I don't think they even let you climb the outside of the pyramid anymore. They sure ain't letting people go inside. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
But that was surreal. This big cat is up. You crawl up this crawl space, and then they added lights to it and stuff, and so it looked really surreal.
Yeah,
but yeah, like with Tingabato, I was allowed to go inside a pyramid too. But yeah, it all depends. They don't let you do much at these ruins anymore. I was in Belize also in 1998 participating in an archaeological dig. I was a field archaeologist for 19 days. Okay. I was volunteering. And at a big Maya site called La Manai with all this monumental architecture, the caretaker of this place let us just crawl all over everything. I could have stolen an artifact from that place and no one would have known. There were like broken pieces that were just on the ground, like little heads and stuff like that. And I could have just like taken something and just, no one would have known. But
Yeah.
nowadays, I think, yeah, things are a lot different now. So, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to get into some UFO activity. So, what's your take on the UFO activity around? I don't want to butcher this name. Popo Capital. It's POPOCATEPETL. Do you think that's a base or a portal or some kind of surveillance or alien? You know what I'm talking about?
Popocatépetl. Popocatépetl. Okay. Yeah. They're the twin volcanoes that are outside of Mexico City. There's Popocatépetl, and then right next to him, see, it's masculine, and right next to him is the White Lady, Iztaccíhuatl. And the White Lady is covered in snow all the time. It's a glacier, it's permanent snowpack. People think of glaciers, they think of Alaska or Switzerland or whatever. But there are 5 glaciers in Mexico, and one of them is Iztaccíhuatl. And sometimes Popocatépetl has a glacier on it too, snowpack that doesn't melt. But right now, I don't believe there's snow on there because the volcano's been active. And there's a lot of UFO activity around there. And part of why we get a lot of reports from UFOs around there is because Mexico City has a huge population. You have 25 million people there. That means 50 million eyes have the potential to look up in the sky and see something. So, one famous UFO sighting was a UFO was seen flying out of the volcano, and that was seen live on morning television, like their version of the Today Show or Good Morning America. There were millions of Mexicans watching this morning show, and there was a meteorologist talking about the weather, and then they went to the volcano because the volcano was starting to spew, smoke and ash, right? And so they turned to the volcano, and then a UFO, it looked like a UFO just came right out of the volcano. And millions of people saw that on live TV.
Whoa.
And yeah, so there's a big I guess belief in Mexico, and it actually could have some ancient roots. There's a big belief in Mexico that UFOs fly in and out of volcanoes. And why I say that's based on an ancient belief is because the ancients, almost every ancient civilization in Mexico believed that volcanoes were like portals to the underworld or a different world. So it would make sense that if spirits would come in and out of volcanoes, that modern day, UFOs coming out in and out of volcanoes, your average Mexican would say, oh, okay, yeah, that's believable. So, yeah, around that volcano, there's a lot of activity. But I think there are a lot more people there who can notice it. Like I said, you have 25 million people there, 50 million eyes, looking up at the sky. So you're going to have a lot of sightings, I think.
Well, I mean, what's weird though, I mean, like around the world, there seems to be more activity around volcanoes as far as UFOs go. I think people have seen, I don't know how real this is, but like people have seen, the UFOs going like in and out of volcanoes, like like seamlessly. Like they don't get affected by the lava, or I don't know. I mean, like, but like I've heard that, like I've heard rumors like that. But have you heard this as well?
Yeah, and then there's right. They'll go through the active volcanoes and dormant volcanoes, and ones with lakes in them. Like there's one I did a show within the last year. There's a place called Alchichica, which is a collapsed volcano that has a lake in the middle. And there have been UFOs going in and out of the lake, supposedly. And there are legends saying that that the lake is bottomless, that there is an outlet to the Pacific. It's like hundreds of miles away from the ocean, right? But people believe that it connects to the ocean, and that that UFOs go in there, and they go to an aquatic base. They use the tunnels to go to some aquatic base or whatever. So that lake is deep, though, and so there's a lot of mystery. And some cryptids have been seen on the shores of that lake, including gigantic axolotls. And an axolotl is a type of amphibian that's usually like about this big. But people have claimed to see axolotls that are like 8 feet long, these creatures by that lake. So
what about the zone of silence? What is that? And do you think that's like extraterrestrial in origin or something? Like, and can you tell people like what it is and stuff?
Well, the zone of silence, I have to do a follow-up show on that, because the first show I did was in 2016. And so in the past 10 years, a lot more information has come out about that. For people who don't know, it's a desert area that is actually part of a reserve, the Mapimi, I think they call it biological reserve. I'm not sure in English how you would call it, but biosphere, that's what it is. Mapimi Biosphere Reserve. And the zone of silence, it's kind of like Mexico's Bermuda Triangle. I say, when I first started this whole project, Mexico Unexplained, I said that there's a counterpart to everything that we know in Mexico. There's a Bigfoot, there's a Loch Ness Monster, and there's a Bermuda Triangle. And it's a place where there are a lot of weird things that happen, anomalies. The first person to notice was Mexico's version of Charles Lindbergh. His name was Tenorio, I think his last name was Tenorio. And he was flying over that area, and his compasses in his plane were going crazy. Okay. Sarabio Tenorio, that was his last name. And so it kind of started with him, because this is a very remote area. Nobody really goes there. But then they set up this biosphere reserve, and some of the locals, the people who live around there, say that the gringos set up that reserve to keep people out, NASA, the CIA, because there's some weird stuff going on there. And some people believe that there's an underground civilization that lives there. The yellow Maya people. Yeah. Supposedly they live underground there. Well, I'm sorry?
Why do they call them the Yellow Maya people?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. That's just the name they use for them. But so there's supposedly people who are living under there, and the locals, they all believe that NASA is doing something there, and it's a strange place. People think that there are vortexes that are in this area that will draw like meteors and, things to Earth from there. UFOs, there was a UFO crash that happened close by. But how I got involved with the zone of silence is I found a diary of one of the park rangers that was posted online in Spanish. See, once again, it's not in English. So that was 10 years ago when I was researching this. You cannot find that diary anywhere on the internet. I wish I would have downloaded, I would have taken screenshots. I just took notes. I did, basic translation, whatever, and prepared my show. I didn't think that things would be yanked, or disappeared. So that guy's entire diary was online. And now you can't find it anywhere. And he talked about black triangles. He talked about in the ranger station, weird things happening with the computers and magnetic anomalies and weird creatures that he saw, deformed cactus, some weird biological stuff. Yeah. But some people believe there's more of a terrestrial explanation for all of this, and that the gringos, once again, they blame the U.S. for everything down in Mexico, by the way. The high price of tortillas, it's the la culpa de los Estados Unidos. It's the fault of the United States that tortilla prices are so high. So they tend to blame America for a lot of stuff, but in this case, there was a lot of suspicion that NASA and the CIA was behind a bunch of experiments going on in this area.
I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't though. You know what I mean? I bet you I mean, usually I bet you if the Mexican people are suspicious of it, something's probably going on. You know, I bet you something paranormal plus something government. You know, like that I mean, you know, the United States government has their hands in everything. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so much stuff that they know that we would never even know about. So I don't even put it past them. You know what I mean? But I mean, who knows? Right? I mean, it's so hard to say, you know. Like,
and you know, this whole zone of silence. If you go a little bit northwest of this area, okay, I did a show on this, and it was after my cryptids book came out. It was called The Lerdo Monster, the New Chupacabra. Okay, so everybody knows about the Chupacabra, and I've talked about that a couple times on your show before, but the blood-sucking monster, right, that goes after livestock and stuff. But this town in northern Mexico that's near the zone of silence, a little bit to the northwest of it, they had this whole rash of, you know, animals being, what do they call it, dissanguated or what? I don't know the word, where they have the blood sucked out of them. And leading up to all of this, the rash disappearance of animals or mutilations, you know, like cattle mutilations and stuff, leading up to that, the people in this town and surrounding little ranchos, they noticed a lot of activity and a lot of gringos in the area. And then once again, they say that somehow in the desert, because these are remote areas, right? The zone of silence is remote. And where this Lerdo place is with this new monster, it's pretty remote too. So you never know. There could be some sort of government experiment that got loose, you know, and that's what people were saying in this area, that, you know, this chupacabra type creature was an escaped mutation from a gringo lab, you know, from some CIA or NASA. I don't know why they always bring up NASA, but NASA is always part of it for some reason. Yeah, so it's, I guess, because they associate that with science, right? So a creature escaped from this lab, I don't know, like the island of Dr. Moreau or something, and then started to attack these farm animals and stuff and dogs. And yeah, so, but in that case, it was interesting that they did see a lot of activity that they thought were Americans in the area, you know, driving trucks and setting up different things, you know, like they were converging on this abandoned warehouse, and some people were saying that there was a lab in there or whatever. I don't know. But well, we'll never know, I guess.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I mean, it seems like there's so much fascinating stuff going on in Mexico. I see now why you say it's like an endless treasure trove of like paranormal stuff. You know, it really is like for example, like you know, like I just was doing research. Like, what is I was looking up for like paranormal hotspots and cursed locations in Mexico. What is the Island of the Dolls? What is that?
Well, that's in the outskirts of Mexico City. That's in Lake Xochimilco. And Xochimilco is one of the last remaining parts of Lake Texcoco, which was the big central lake that the Aztecs had their capital in the middle of the lake on an island. The southern part of it is still lake and swampland. And the Island of the Dolls, there's really not much to that story. I mean, there's been stuff that's happened there since there was a reclusive man who collected dolls and just like posted them everywhere on this island.
That's weird, bro. Right? I mean, like, why
Yeah,
would
it
you?
is right. It is very weird. But then people, the guy died eventually, whatever, and then people claim that a lot of those dolls are haunted. He got some of those dolls, he collected them from grave sites and, weird things. Some of the dolls are possessed. And yeah, there were a lot of different stories. And I'm sure I did a show on that island actually. But since I've done that show, I'm sure I could come up with probably a dozen more stories connected to that place, you
Yeah,
know?
that's cool. Yeah. What about haunted? I just came up with some stuff like haunted convents. Is there this is a thing too? I guess.
Well, it depends. I mean, there are a lot of haunted places that are very old. And so like in Guadalajara, I believe there is a haunted convent that was also a hospital at one time. So a lot of these older buildings, um, some of the religious buildings also served as hospitals like 400 years ago when the Spanish were there. And so whenever there's a former hospital there, then that's when, you know, there's weirdness and ghosts and unsettled spirits and stuff like that. So there are a lot of old buildings down there, that's for sure.
Yeah. This is. I just wanted to show you this. This is Sovereign Cosmic Wildman's thing on the NASA Mexico thing. He
Mm-hmm.
says he feels like the reason why they say a lot of NASA, a lot in Mexico, because of the UFO crashes there were visited by a group of people posing as NASA. In reality, they could be MIBs or Black Ops. What do you think about that possibility?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, because there are crashes and landings and stuff like that. And um, a lot of times the debris is hauled off, or the landing site is shut down. So who's doing the gathering of the materials or the bodies, and who's shutting down the landing sites?
Yeah.
You got to wonder who's behind it.
Yeah, is there a rich Men in Black culture in Mexico? I mean, is it reported that they've been seen a lot there?
Not really. No, not like in the United States. Black eyed kids, that's something different. But men in black, no. Um, they usually chalk it up to, see, that goes back to that comment that you just put down on the bottom of the screen. People just assume it's NASA, or just the gringos in
Yeah.
general. So
Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Let's talk about the Black Eyed Kid. The first time I heard about the Black Eyed Kids was on a Whitley Strieber show, and he was talking to uh, oh man, I can't remember who he was talking to, but I mean, oh, it was oh, it's going to drive me nuts now. But I mean, it was an episode of Dreamland, and it just freaked me out so much that there could be these like basically like children versions of like I don't even know what they are. I don't want to say Men in Black because they're not that. They're children with black eyes, basically. And they're the black eyed children. You're saying this is somewhat big down in Mexico, or it has a bigger, you know?
well, it was hot like 20 years ago, like in the early 2000s, the first decade of the 2000s, whatever we're calling that. I don't know what it's called. But during that time, there were a lot of sightings. And some people believe it was because the internet was exploding at that time. And people in Mexico were getting access to the internet, and they were reading these stories and, filling their heads full of stuff. But then also, some people say no, because the internet was becoming more available in Mexico, that allowed people to tell their stories, whereas before they couldn't, right? Who were they going to tell? Um, but there was a rash of sightings in the early 2000s from Tijuana in the upper corner of Mexico all the way down to the Yucatan. And it's the same MO as in the United States. Kids will show up at your door and they will ask for water. They'll say, I'm thirsty, whatever. And then it's the whole vampire thing. If you let them in, then that's it. It's all over, right? I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know how they figure that out though, because
yeah.
if you let them in and it's all over, then who's going to tell you that the black-eyed kids were there, right?
Yeah, I know, right? I think it's just I guess it has to be some kind of just like they're speculating that if they let them in, it's like, because you're
Right.
right. There's no one has ever. It's kind of like people like nobody's ever really like survived the dogman encounter. You know what I mean? Like you
Right.
never. Or I mean, I guess there are probably some stories out there, but you never hear someone like really getting into it with like a full fist fight or or a battle with a dogman and like coming out of it. You know what I mean? You always just hear like the dog man's like larking and they barely missed him this time. You know what I mean? Like you never hear someone having like a full-on fledged, like full-on attack with a dog man, and surviving it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
And
at
so,
least I haven't. Maybe Sovereign Cosmic Wildman has, because I know he knows a lot about the paranormal and stuff. So if you're listening to Sovereign Cosmic Wildman, let me know if you've ever heard someone surviving a dogman encounter, or if anybody in the audience has. I'd love to know that. I know what you mean. That's I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Would you agree with that? Do you think, or what do you?
well, okay. So all we know as far as the black-eyed kids are concerned is that they show up at your door. And what we hear from people who are experiencers are those people who close the door on them. So all they have is a description of what they look like and what they're saying, and that they want to come in. All right. So then people, I think, go off and think about vampires, don't let them in or whatever. But
Yeah.
the black-eyed kids in Mexico, they look like gringos, okay, but they speak perfect Spanish, kind of
Wow.
like the Nordics and these other aliens who show up. They always speak flawless Spanish for some reason. And so the black-eyed kids, they show up and then they ask for a glass of water or whatever. And the encounters that we have are all people who don't let them in. And so they're all the same. And there's speculation that the black-eyed kids were a lab experiment, and they got loose, and now they're traveling the world. So the black-eyed kids sightings, I think, started in the United States in the 1990s, and then they got to Mexico in the early 2000s. But you know what? I haven't heard of any recent sightings like within the past 10 years or so, 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Things come in waves. Like the chupacabra, it's like it's gone now. It was popular in the 90s, and then for maybe 10 or 15 years into this century. But you just don't hear much about it. I mean, then that doesn't mean that there aren't sightings or attacks or whatever. I mean, we're just not hearing about it. Maybe people aren't talking about it like they used to. That's all that could mean.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. This is a good one. This is a good question I had. What topic from Mexico Unexplained do you think is the most slept on? Like, what do you think that people are, do you think people would find very interesting that they're not, that maybe doesn't get talked about as much?
Probably all of them, I think.
Yeah.
And any of these shows, you can pick the shows, and most people don't know anything about them, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I was that way myself. It happens all the time where I come up with interesting things that I didn't know about. I thought I wrote the book on the cryptids. I thought I sealed it up and that there were no more, but there's always some that are popping up, like the Tecolootla sea monster. I didn't know there was a sea monster that was off the coast of Mexico and then it washed ashore. And people were claiming that it was a whale, but it looked like what you would consider the classic Loch Ness monster.
Yeah.
But back to your question, I think every single topic I talk about, people could, ask more questions about it. And, they're not known by many people.
Yeah. What about saints and the reinterpretations? Do you believe that some saints are actually reinterpretations of older supernatural beings?
Well, I guess that's an interesting question because the saints are mostly modern and they're living people. So um I don't know. I mean,
Well, I say that because you can tie this into voodoo culture, and I know voodoo culture isn't Mexican, but like it is a different culture. But like I have Miss Aida on my show. She's a witch. I call her the good witch. But I love when I have her on. I usually have her on around Halloween, but she always tells me that the saints and the orishas in voodoo are the same. So like when people like pray to the saints, they're actually or they when they would pray to the orishas in voodoo, that would be like the saints, like or something like that. Like I don't know, like it would, or no, they would pray to the saints, but that would actually be the orishas because for whatever reason they had to cover up their voodoo culture because it wasn't accepted by like the slave masters, I guess, or something like that. I think that's right. I'm
well,
not sure.
there's that element in Mexico too, because there were African slaves imported to Mexico. And if you look at the records of the Spanish Inquisition, and the Spanish Inquisition was that arm of the church that would go and look at people for practicing, people, they would investigate people if they were practicing witchcraft or Satanism, anything that was involving the divine that wasn't sanctioned by the church. And if you look at the archives of the Inquisition in Mexico, there's a huge representation, an overrepresentation of Afro-Mexican people in those archives. Because what they were doing is they were carrying on the traditions from Africa, the healing traditions. And so they were taking that and then also blending it with Catholicism, like the Orishas and the saints that you were mentioning before. So they were taking some of that, and it's called syncretism, where you blend the religions like that. So there is a tradition in Mexico that's African based that's very similar to that, like what we see in the Caribbean, or like with voodoo or Santeria, or in Brazil, there's macumba and candomblé, which are the same as the combination of the African and the Catholic faiths. So yeah, that exists in Mexico too.
Wow, that's cool. We had a question from the audience. This is from Derek Woorider. He says, "Can Mr. Bitto tell us the story of Saint Juan Diego and the Virgin Mary?"
Well, that's probably the most famous saint story in Mexico. Okay, so the Virgin Mary appeared on a hill called Tepeyac, and she appeared to this humble indigenous man named Juan Diego, and she told him to build a temple or build a church on that hill, which was ironic because that hill was a holy hill to the Aztecs, before the conversion of Christians. But the Spanish were having a hard time converting a lot of the natives at the time. So some people believe that this apparition of the Virgin Mary was a hoax, that it really didn't happen, and that it happened in a way, the story was told in a way so that it would convert the rest of the natives easier. Okay, it would make the whole conversion process easier. So, okay, the Virgin Mary appeared to Juan Diego 3 times, told him that a church needed to be built on that hill, and he went down to the bishop of Mexico City, Zumárraga was his name, and said, the Virgin Mary appeared on the hill. And the bishop said, bring me proof that she did. And so he went back up to the hill. She appeared again. And then she said, okay, open up your cloak, woven out of cactus fibers, and I'll put roses in your cloak, and you can show them to the the bishop because roses were not in bloom at the time, right? It was winter. And so he went down to the main cathedral in the plaza, talked to Bishop Zumárraga, and said, I brought these roses as proof that the Virgin Mary appeared to me. So he unfurled his cloak, and then on the cloak was the emblazoned image of the Virgin Mary, the Virgin of Guadalupe, known as today. And that cloak, which is almost 500 years old, is still hanging in the Basilica to the Virgin of Guadalupe that stands on that hill right now to this day.
Wow.
And the cloak supposedly has not changed. And I've seen it multiple times, actually. I've been there a couple times.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's an interesting story. But some people say it's a hoax because they're having a hard time converting the Indians, the natives. And so this caused like mass conversions to happen. And this wasn't the only instance. There were other times too where like the Black Christ of Chalma, it was supposedly this idol was in a cave. The Augustinian brothers were having a hard time converting this part of Mexico. And then in this cave, there was human sacrifice going on and all this stuff. And there was this idol that was in the cave. And then one night, supposedly, the idol exploded and it turned into a black Jesus. And then because of that happening, the whole countryside converted to Christianity almost immediately.
Yeah.
But some people will say that could be a trick, you know. So
yeah. What I was going to say, I think this is a good idea, Robert. Like, I don't know if you thought about this one, because I know you just kind of moved to Nebraska. You're probably kind of settling in, but like, I know you talked about this before. I was going to say you should honestly do a trip to Mexico. You know I would promote it for you in front of my audience. Like, you know, like if we combine the audiences, mine and yours, we could probably get a really fun trip together. And like, I know a lot of people that would probably be interested in doing it. You know, I mean, it just seems like I already have my passport too, but like, it seems like there's such a rich culture there. You know what I mean? I definitely have to see Mexico before I die. You know, like I definitely want to see it. And you seem like you would really know. And you said you used to lead tours there. So like, have you thought about doing this again? Like, you know, doing the tour down there?
Well, yeah, when I had a retail store for 10 years between 1999 and 2009, people said to me, you know, it'd be neat to go on a buying trip with you to see all these places where the arts and crafts are made. So then I put it out there that, you know, I was going to do tours, and the tours filled up with customers because they knew me coming to my store and stuff. And so I've toyed with the idea of tours. I put it out there with my Mexico Unexplained audience, and I seem to get like a lukewarm response to it. And, you know, it takes a lot of work to set this stuff up. So I don't know, maybe I need to grow a little bit more before, you know, maybe I got to hit that million subs before I can do something like that. No, I don't know. I might revisit that. Yeah. So like you said, I've done it before, and, you know, I enjoy it. It was a lot of fun to take people down there and, you know, show them all this stuff. It's a heck of a lot of fun.
What do you think one of the most interesting places to go visit there is? Like, I noticed when someone went, I think it was Sean Bond who went down there. They have like hot springs down there too. They look to be like they're like right on the, you know, those look pretty amazing. Those hot springs, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really pick one place that would be interesting. I mean, if I were to do these tours, I'd have like 2 launching off points. I'd have like Mexico City as a place that we would stay for a few nights and then do day trips outside, you know, because there are different places to visit and things. And then I'd probably go over to Guadalajara and then use that as a base for 4 days and go to different places, you know, for day trips. So yeah, It's endless, really. But I really have to have some sort of commitment from people, because it is a lot of work to set this up, all the logistics and stuff.
Yeah, I can
Because you got to
imagine.
arrange for hotels and buses and, all of this. And yeah, so.
Yeah. Um, and let me see here if I had any more questions. Okay. Well, yeah, I guess we could just finish this. What's coming next on Mexico Unexplained that people should look out for?
Well, this coming show is going to be about a mysterious indigenous group that's in Western Mexico that nobody talks about. There are a lot of groups in Mexico that people don't know about, native groups, because it seems like the Aztecs, the Maya, and the Yaqui, they always get a lot of press. But there are a lot of different groups that are out there that have rich legends and traditions and history and things like that, and people don't know about them. So I'm going to look this weekend. My upcoming show is about the Cora people of southwestern Mexico, and people usually don't even. I mean, most people have never even heard of them. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah. Did you want to promote your book again? And thank you so much for coming on, Robert. This was awesome.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
wait,
thank you.
this is we have one more question. This is from Derek. Just to do this real quick before we. He says one more question. He says, how much control do you feel like the cartels still have in Mexico? Do you feel like that's pretty strong, or what do you think's going on with that?
Yeah, it's hard to tell because, like, the current president, she's very much what you would call a globalist leftist. You know, she, it depends on who you think is controlling the world. Because if you think that there are people above that we can't see, the black nobility from Venice, the
Yeah,
Jesuits, whatever, you know, they will be above the cartels. But if you want to look at like everyday governance and what's going on in the everyday of Mexico, the cartels have a big grip on that country, especially like the countryside. How much they've infiltrated the government? Well, they have a lot of money, so they can pay off pretty much anybody they want. So
yeah.
it's really hard to tell.
I truly believe, though, like you said, like that there's these groups that seriously run the world, like the Jesuits, the Black nobility, the Islamic Brotherhood, the Zionists. You know what I mean? Then you have the 13 families, the Rothschilds. You know what I mean? The banking cartel. You know what I mean? Like I feel like these people are really running the world. You know what I mean? Like
Well,
it's
people will look at Bill Gates or whatever. I think there are people above him that you don't know about, you
yeah,
know? He's kind
exactly.
of like there's Bill Gates, Elon Musk, these big name millionaires or whatever. But there could be layers above them that, you know, if you were controlling the world, would you want people to know that you were doing it? I
Yeah,
don't
and
think
you know
so.
what? That's why they probably put out a lot of disinformation, Robert.
Yeah.
That's why my friend who's not into conspiracies, he always says to me, he's like, "Do you think the government would ever let you know anything?" I said, "Well, you never know, man." I said, "Stuff slips out." I said, "But I mean,"
Yeah.
I said to him, I said, "That's why, like, a lot of us in the community feel like we're psychically in tune and we know what resonates with us and we know what doesn't, and we can kind of sense out bullshit. So if something resonates with you, I say go with it. But if it feels like bullshit and it smells like bullshit, it's probably bullshit, right?" I don't know.
That's usually how it works. Yeah, so it's hard to tell about the cartels because I don't think they're the final word when it comes to control.
Yeah. 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 Who do you think would be above the cartels? Do you think the Vatican has a strong hold in Mexico, if you had to guess?
I don't
Because
know.
of the religious
You
thing?
think I'm in on it? You think I'm in on it? I would know. That's something that I always it's interesting. I say that jokingly, but people, when I bring up like conspiracy theories or whatever, people will always say, well, why are they doing this? What's the reason? You think COVID's fake? Why would somebody do that? I always say, You think I'm in on it? How am I supposed to know?
Yeah,
I don't know. All I know is that it's crap, that it's a lie or whatever. I'll look at something and I'll expose it for what it is. And then people will ask me, try to give me these gotcha questions. And I always default to that. You think I'm involved? You think I'm in on it? How am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to know the motivations behind these things? I don't
It's
know.
always like these psychopaths, Robert. Every time they do something, it's a multifaceted thing. It's not just one thing. This is what I think. I think every time they roll out something, every time when something like Maui happens, Hawaii, or any kind of this geoengineering shit, or any kind of thing that smells like a psyop, I feel like there's multi-level. But I had to show you this one more thing. This is really funny. Derek also said, hey, Rob, remember when people said Mr. Bitto was in the FBI? Yeah, I remember that. That was on my old channel, right? Someone tried to say you were. I was like, that was hilarious because I know you're not in the FBI. That was hilarious.
I'm a Fed, yeah. That's right. Well, where's my paycheck? That's what I say to people. Right? I should be living, back in Southern California in some $10 million gated mansion. Where's my money if I'm a Fed or whatever?
Well, Corey Good and David Wilcock are living like that. You know what I mean? Like they I mean, that's something to think about, guys. Like some of these people that are in the community that have these like luxury, lifestyles, that's I don't know if it's good to necessarily trust that information, right? Because those people might be being paid, I don't know. Like I didn't want to bring up Corey Good or David Wilcock. I don't have anything against them. I just I don't know, but
well, you know what, a good rule of thumb here is you concentrate on your own work. Whether someone else is a shill or a paid government operative or whatever, what does that have to do with my next book? That's what I say to myself. I got to concentrate on my own, deal going here. And so I try to ignore like that stuff. So it's hard not to in some cases where you think it's kind of blatant or whatever, but I'm just doing my own thing. And, when people accuse me of being a Fed or whatever, I say, well, where's my paycheck? Where's my secret Swiss bank account? I've been doing this for so long. I mean, come on.
That's hilarious. You're absolutely right though, too, honestly. Yeah. Well, this was awesome, Robert. Do you want to promote the book? And thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing. This was a really
Thanks for having me again. Anyone who wants to buy a book or see what other things I do or whatever, the best place to go is MexicoUnexplained.com. And then that has everything. I have merch, I have the books. And then, like I said, you can read this stuff and see, I'm shooting myself in the foot when I say this. You can read all this stuff pretty much for free on the website. You just gotta hunt and peck for the different articles and stuff. But everything on the website, all the information is free. So you can just go in there and explore, and feel free to contact me through all of the social medias. It's all linked there and everything. And I love hearing from the audience. I love hearing from people because I get a lot of good ideas from people. So I encourage, I'm not one of those podcasters or whatever who say, stay away. I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to engage. No, I engage with the comment section, and I want to hear from people. So yeah, go to MexicoUnexplained.com and drop me a line if you want.
Yeah. And tomorrow's schedule, guys, I have Pink Bella Aloha coming on, and then Liz Cross, and then Sadhu Das. So it's a really interesting lineup for tomorrow. Hopefully everything goes well and everybody confirms. And so I'll see you guys all tomorrow. I'm going to work on those shows. And then I have a big show with Indigo Angel Friday about Epstein and the grids, like the grids behind Epstein Island. So that's Friday. Wow. And then so it's an interesting week. It should be I'm looking over everything. Yeah. All right.
Cool.
Thanks, Robert. And I will see you guys all soon, and have a good night, everybody.